Associate Professor Jamus.
Mr. Speaker, the proposed amendments to the National Productivity Fund are meant to allow for expansion of the scope of the fund following Deputy Prime Minister's budget statement earlier this year. In that speech, DPM Wong also proposed an expansion of the fund by $4 billion. While I support the thrust of the expanded objective and, by extension, the bill, I have some significant reservations about this wider coverage as to whether it may inadvertently lead to a dilution in the purposes of the fund, which would in turn be detrimental to the ultimate goal of producing sustainable growth in the longer run. Clause 3B allows grants to now be directed toward the general purpose of, quote, making investments in Singapore or carrying out economic activities in Singapore in order to develop the Singapore economy, end quote. Similarly, Clause 6 amends the second schedule to recognize investment promotion as a supportable activity. But the amendment likewise adds the qualifier that the fund may be applied to the promotion of not just investment, but also, again, economic activities in Singapore. In my view, this is relatively expansive language. Were this bill to pass, investments by the MPF would no longer be limited to just financing for productivity enhancement or continuing education, as they currently are, but investments in general, so long as it contributes toward economic development. But would this mean that the fund could be directed toward crude capital accumulation, such as the purchasing of capital equipment or funding factory construction? What about infrastructure projects like a new Changi terminal, which would otherwise, or could otherwise, be financed by other instruments such as Singapore bonds? By a similar token, what are allowable promotions for economic activities? Would it include, for instance, marketing for sports events, such as the Singapore Rugby Sevens, although I would be happy if it were to do so, or the Grand Prix, or the Singapore Art Week, or the Singapore Food Festival? What about Taylor Swift and Jackie Chung concerts? After all, having taken over the sports hub, these now certainly qualify as economic activities within the purview of the government. In my view, these investments fall well outside the scope of productivity-enhancing activities and hence should not qualify for MPF grants. Allowing them, as well-meaning as it might be, would subvert the original objectives of the NPF. And while one could make a case for supporting growth at all costs, I believe that this is similarly wrong-headed. We already know how to rudely drive growth, crank up capital expenditure, unfortunately to the detriment often of both labor income and productivity. Indeed, this has been a consistent criticism of Singapore's growth model during its rapid growth phase from the 1960s through to the 1990s, and was in fact the impetus for the menagerie of productivity campaigns and bodies that, alas, saw largely a continuation of our nation's relatively anemic productivity gains, at least relative to our headline growth. So, while it is tempting for us to look to bolstering growth from tried and tested tools, such as building up more of our already intensive capital stock, we must surely resist, because it is clear that returns to plowing further resources into investment is already hitting diminishing returns. Moreover, doing so would undermine the very purpose of the fund, which is to elevate productivity and not investment per se. So perhaps unsurprisingly, the desire to foster productivity-enhancing investment is also the essence of other schemes that DPM Wong announced during his speech, such as the Enterprise Innovation Scheme for nurturing and sustaining research and development, which is the linchpin of enduring productivity gains. I am on record for supporting that initiative and continue to do so. But just as important to productivity, especially economy-wide productivity, is the need to not just boost innovation, but also the assimilation and deployment of said innovation throughout firms in the economy. And while automation and digitalization were at the forefront of the previous wave of productivity increments, the next one is far more likely to be driven by artificial intelligence, or AI, and robotization. Now, this topic is not unfamiliar to this House. Members have asked about the rollout of AI in Singapore, including by my honorable friend, Ms. Herting Roo, on how our local workforce will meet demand for AI skills, by the honorable members Desmond Chu and Melvin Yong on incorporating AI into the school curricula and government services. And Ms. He, along with Ms. Tim Pei Ling, have also posed questions about government oversight of AI, underscoring a common fear that absent robust regulation, AI may run amok. AI is but the latest example of a general-purpose technology, for which large language models and generative AIs, such as ChatGPT, are the latest, albeit most impressive, iteration. General-purpose technologies are technologies that permeate every aspect of daily life, gradually improving over time while holding the ability, the tantalizing ability to spawn further innovation. Steam, electricity, and information and communications technology, or ICT, are earlier examples. Now, these earlier waves of general-purpose technologies found their way into the economy at a slower rate, but the pace of adoption has accelerated over time. The steam engine only became widely used in Britain after 100 years and needed another quarter century before making it across Europe. Electrification required about a half century to become ubiquitous, while computers and the internet took at least a generation. Smartphones have spread much more rapidly, finding their way into the hands of even those in the remotest parts of Asia and Africa in a little more than a decade. Yet, even when compared to companies at the forefront of Web 2.0, such as Facebook and Twitter, today Meta and X, both of which gathered 1 million users after only a year or two, ChatGPT has become pervasive at a rabid speed, having amassed that user base in a mere 5 days. And unlike earlier general-purpose technologies, AI appears to be threatening the top rather than the bottom of the distribution of human capabilities. Up until now, the specter of technological progress had often come for the blue-collar job. In the late 18th century, textile workers displaced by steam-powered looms followed the apocryphal example of the apprentice Ned Ludd, smashing the machines that replaced them and thereby earning the derisory moniker Luddite, a term we still use today to refer to technophobes. The accelerated adoption of automated switching telephones after the Second World War made the services of manual switchboard operators redundant, while more recently, the personal computer and smartphone replaced the stenographer and secretary, white-collar functions requiring only modest training and skills. Hence, while the computer scientists that design algorithms for AI and other machine learning models will still likely find themselves relevant in an AI-driven economy, a great many others will find themselves less lucky. 5 years ago, we had already seen examples of how routine mental work, such as data entry, insurance, underwriting, tax preparation, and telemarketing, could easily be automated away. But AI can now outperform even white-collar workers engaged in creative, cognitively demanding, non-routine tasks, such as designing websites, performing radiographic diagnoses, and summarizing legal briefs. Pair AI with advances in robotics that have become ever better at fine motor and gross motor functions, from piecing together microchips to navigating military obstacle courses to driving cars and trucks. And it becomes difficult to imagine what sort of jobs aren't immune to the threat from this newest wave of general-purpose technology. Taken together, our economy will need to transform itself as never before to adapt to these changes faster than ever before. So the fundamental tension that emerges with the introduction of any new general-purpose technology is the promise, but also potential, profit by this technology versus the risks and repercussions of this self-same technology for the economy and society at large. On the benefit side, we might expect that the general purpose technology could provide a boost to productivity and more generally welfare. But this can carry substantive costs. Workers whose jobs are destroyed, think horse breeders and carriage makers after the car became widespread, or candle and lantern makers after the advent of the light bulb, will see a downward spiral in incomes, employability, and eventually economic security. Companies will also undergo churn. There'll be winners, think IBM and Microsoft, after the invention of the personal computer, or Amazon and Google, following the internet revolution, as well as losers. Now, if history is any guide, the leaps made in the earlier stages after the introduction of a new technology will peter out over time. After the initial disruption, completely new applications, once inconceivable to contemporaries, would find their way into common use. Producers of Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz could scarcely have imagined that one day their industry would become one where actors would perform in front of a green screen wired up alongside computer-generated co-stars, all digitally delivered and enjoyed predominantly not in the cinemas, but at home. Spreadsheets may have been expected to render accountants irrelevant, but what that meant was that tedious bookkeeping functions now came to occupy less time of our accounting professionals, allowing them to focus on higher order, value-added tasks like balance sheet analysis and forecasting, along with advisory functions. AI is likely to do the same, but supercharged. Along with these novel uses, new jobs will be created. Horseshoe blacksmiths became old-school auto mechanics who have now become diagnostic operators who predominantly replace circuit boards in cars. Close to 3/5 of jobs in 2018 did not exist in 1940. Therefore, almost by definition, we cannot conceive of the sort of labor needs that an AI come robotics-driven future economy may demand. But it is likely to be in areas that are uniquely human. Jobs that require an interpersonal touch, such as counseling and care, are in less danger as are manual, physical roles, welding, electrical wiring, haircuts, massages, that robots perhaps can replicate, but for now, at least, aren't quite able to do so as quickly and efficiently, or enjoyably. Perhaps more importantly, AI can augment our existing work, especially in the creative professions, so long as we're able to leverage AI to customize goods and services offerings, thereby expanding both the size and the scope of the market. For example, a beauty advisor for cosmetics may be able to use AI to scan the customer's face, offer recommendations suited for the individual, cross-referenced to their historical purchases and preferences. At one level, this may reduce the work of any one given advisor. But if it reduces the time required for an advisor to serve a customer, it could drum up additional business instead. The corporate landscape will also be transformed. The AI rollout has already resulted in firms with greater AI exposure run ahead of those with less. Eventually, companies that fail to deploy AI extensively in their business operations will be left behind, either by competitors who are better able to do so, or because AI will have rendered their entire industry obsolete. Many will fail. Mergers and takeovers will inevitably follow. Once these transformations occur, we will likely be able to reap the net benefits of AI for our economy. The world has seen a dramatic slowing of productivity worldwide after the 2007 global financial crisis. And indeed, as far back as the 1980s, Nobel Prize winner Robert Solow commented that one could see the IT revolution everywhere, except in the productivity statistics. Now, that productivity boost eventually arrived around a decade or two later, and bumped up productivity for about a decade and a half, at least until the crisis. This then is the fundamental promise of the AI revolution, a revival or a revitalization of our nation's productivity and growth. How soon we get there is unclear, as are the sort of disruptions that will occur along the way. But now it is now incumbent on the government, working hand in hand with our private sector, to help our companies, both large and small, utilize AI in their business, operations, and to help our workers get comfortable working with AI as they go about their workday. Now, this should be a major imperative for our nation. The National AI Strategy document appears to recognize this, but it's noteworthy that the term productivity only appears a dozen times in the 45-page document, and twice in the foreword and twice in quotes, leaving the body of the document offering only 3 concrete examples for potential productivity gains from AI. It is important that we remember that technology adoption is neither inevitable nor automatic. Rather, efforts must be directed specifically to domestic investments in technology adoption, as well as R&D tailored toward that purpose. This is why, in my view, the language of the bill should, as far as possible, be clearly limited to productivity-enhancing investments, because it will ensure that the dollars in the NPF are channeled toward this specific purpose. And of course, this isn't, nor should it be, limited to companies. Thankfully, the original act already allows for the funding of continuing education, training, research, and scholarships, all of which may be directed toward human capital accumulation in support of raising productivity. It is imperative, however, that such research and training opportunities be available to the typical worker and small and medium enterprise, rather than being limited to just highly skilled so-called knowledge workers or large multinationals. That's the only way to ensure that the AI revolution becomes infused into the broad fabric of our economy. What may be even better is if the MPF will commit to providing an in-depth report to Parliament that details how precisely the $4 billion in funds are to be used, the sort of activities these funds support, and the main beneficiaries of these programs. This will provide greater clarity on how channeling funds with government bodies as an intermediary ultimately gets to our businesses and workers to upgrade their productivity. It will also clarify how, if at all, monies from the fund may overlap with those set aside for Skills Future. Mr. Speaker, how will the transition to our collective AI future occur? It's hard to tell, but I expect that an ecosystem of AI adoption startups will eventually emerge, and that established consultancies will likewise expand their offerings to include AI support. Over the next decade or so, the National Productivity Fund, working through these government intermediaries, should be applied as much as possible toward helping our local companies and people become fully AI-enabled. More generally, we need to allow AI to fully permeate our companies and workers, to become an invention that fosters itself new methods of invention and new ways of going about doing things. When that eventually occurs, the productivity gains that have so far eluded us may, perhaps, finally find fruition.